Hello. In this video we begin looking at the book of Jonah. We're just going to look at chapter 1 in this particular section of the course, or in this particular course should I say. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at one or two verses each week, and we're going to perform what's called a close reading. So we're going to read through it. First of all, I'll read through the verse, and then we're going to look at aspects of morphology, syntax. We're going to do a bit of literary analysis on it, looking at repetition, word choice, and various narrative features. And what I'll be doing, the information I'll be giving you, what you'll ideally need to do is try to work back from that and try to ask yourself the question, what questions am I asking in order to produce the actual presentation which I'm giving? I say that because it's important for you to learn what questions to ask a text, because you yourselves will need to perform a similar literary analysis. Even if it's just on one verse, you'll have to address the same topics, the same ideas that I'm addressing from the text, in the text that I'll be giving you in the final assignment. When we do this, most detail will be given in the first few verses. We'll be looking at one or two verses a week, a unit, as I said before. I'll be giving you almost an excess of information and data in the first few weeks, and then there'll be less of that as many of the features are repetitive. And then we're going to look at more of a literary analysis in the latter verses that we actually deal with. So this is the first verse. I'm going to read it out, and we're going to have the sections which I'm going to be reading. The sections which I will be reading are going to be highlighted in red. So this is how it sounds, and after I read it out, we'll go back and we'll look at each word and phrase individually. Vayehi dvar Adonai el Jonah ven Amitai lemor. That's what the text looks like. So now let's look at each individual piece. We begin with the word Vayehi, which is from the root Hey Yud Hey. Even though we can't see many of the letters now, you need to understand, or by now you should have gone through the weaker verbs, and you should have an idea of some of the changes that take place. The Vav is of the Vav consecutive, and the Yud is of the imperfect form. The Hey is the first root letter, the Yud is the second root letter, and the third root letter, because it's a Lamed Hey verb, it does not appear in the Vav consecutive or in the Vayiktor form, so we don't see it here now at all. Notice also in this word that there is no Dagesh inside the Yud. Normally the Vav consecutive consists of the Vav, the Patach, and a dagesh which comes inside the preformative of the imperfect verb. Here that's not the case, and this sometimes happens whenever the consonant above a shva, or in certain instances with certain consonants above the shva. Once we have a lamed, it sometimes occurs with as well, but it most commonly appears with a yud. So that explains why there is no dagesh inside the final yud. Here we have Dvar Adonai. Now this is a construct form of the word davar. We can see, even though this word was taken out totally independent of the makef and the word Adonai, you would find a kamatz underneath the dalit and the patach underneath the bet. But because of the shva and the patach, basically what's happened is the accent has shifted off of this particular word. Therefore this accent shortens from patach to a shva, and so we have the construct form Dvar Adonai. It will not appear like this as an entry in the dictionary. You may well find the dalit bet resh, but you'll have different vowels underneath it, and that's why, because this is in construct form. Now when it comes to interpreting this phrase, we will have to interpret it as the word of the Lord. And the reason why we make it definite is because the name of the Lord here is in fact a proper noun. and because of that it's definite, and as a result the whole construct becomes definite. So we'd have to translate the word of the Lord as opposed to a word of the Lord. Once one part of the construct statement is definite, the whole thing becomes definite. El Jonah. Here we have a preposition plus a personal name. Jonah, the actual word as a name, it also simply means dove, which we know from Genesis 8:8, when Noah sends the dove out to survey the earth for any signs of land. But here it's a proper noun. So you're going to find this also under the BDB with the n.pr whether masculine or feminine. There's a bit of a problem with translating this, because literally it means the word of the Lord unto Jonah, and we would expect something along the lines of the word ba, Vayehi devar Adonai ba el Jonah, the word of the Lord came unto Jonah. But we don't actually have that. We literally have the word of the Lord unto Jonah. So if we're going to understand that the word come or go or went or something like that is in there, we have to try and find evidence that this is the case elsewhere. And the one way we can do that is if we check the BDB, and you'll find there on page 225b that the word haya, hey yud hey, this one here, it can carry the sense of come unto. That's one of the entries we find in the BDB. So if you find something like this where it doesn't quite translate in the way you want it to translate, and you feel there's a need for an extra word, the BDB is one very good place to go. Somewhere else you need to go is, if you have a Bible program, a Hebrew program, you could do a search on the phrase Vayehi el X or Y, or Vayehi devar Adonai el. And you'll find that this same phrase occurs in a number of other places, such as Genesis 15:1, 2 Samuel 7:4, 1 Kings 16:1, and in each case you've got the exact same phrase, but it's always translated as the word of the Lord came unto. So one way or the other, in situations like this, you ought to provide some kind of evidence for the way in which you are translating it. Proof from somewhere else in the Bible, or proof from the BDB that backs up your particular translation. That's very important to do. Ven amitai. Here we've got a couple of things a bit different about this form. Ven. Ven, you'd normally expect to see ben with the weak dagesh inside of the bet, because it's a beged kefet. But there is a rule in Hebrew which says, a phonetic rule, which says once an open syllable precedes a beged kefet, then frequently the weak dagesh is not pronounced. So we have Jonah ven amitai. It's an important rule to remember. I'm sure we'll see it again before we finish reading this chapter of Jonah. The other subtle change we ought to be mindful of is that the construct form of the word ben is used here. Normally we'd expect to see ben with a tzere, a longer e. But once again, because it's in construct form, the accent moves ahead to the second word, and this loses the accent, and so it shortens from a tzere, the longer e, to the segol, the shorter e. And the final thing we're going to look at is this phrase here, lemor. And in this phrase here, lemor, it is in fact an infinitive construct form of the root aleph mem resh. Aleph mem resh. A number of changes take place. We have the aleph acquiescing entirely with no vowel above or below it whatsoever. And we've got the longer e to compensate for that, the tzarei at the beginning of the word here. Whenever we see this word, or most of the time we see this word, you need to translate it as saying, because normally what follows this word is a direct quote, which in English, when you translate it, it would appear in inverted in commas as direct speech. This is a kind of a weird word to translate, because sometimes you won't even need to translate it as saying at all, but you will simply indicate that there is open quotation marks, and then what follows goes within those quotation marks, and then you would close them. But it can be a bit tricky to interpret. What you don't want to do is interpret it as to say. We wouldn't say the word of the Lord came to Jonah to say at all. Taking a step back then, what do we see in this opening verse of Jonah? From a larger perspective, one of the things we must notice is this phrase here, Vayehi. And you'll find out again that this is frequently used as an introduction to a brand new narrative, or a new narrative section, or a new narrative segment. We find Vayehi, and it's a nice indicator, it's a nice sign to pick up on if you're doing performing an exegesis on a much longer text. You want to locate these words and make it a paragraph, make it a brand new section, because something quite new is happening from that point onwards. Another point we know to be aware of is this individual, Jonah ben Amittai. He is somebody who's mentioned here, and we do have an attestation of his name in 2 Kings 14:25, where it says, he restored the borders of Israel from the entrance of Hamat as far as the sea of the Arabah. This is the king of Israel, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke through his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, who was of Gat Hefer. And this mention of Jonah in the book of Kings, 2 Kings 14:25, if you like, it casts a positive light on Jonah, who is a prophet of the Lord. He does prophesy things, and they do come to pass. So it kind of gives us a background knowledge of the prophet before we even actually read this particular story. We know a little bit of information about him. He's reliable, he's trustworthy, he's spoken to kings, and so that's the attitude, or that's the frame of mind which we carry as we enter into this text. It's always important to try, wherever possible, to pick up on inner biblical allusions or connections like this when we read a text, because normally they are written, the text like Jonah was written purposefully to recall, for the readers to recall instances that happened elsewhere and bring that knowledge into the text for a fuller, more complete meaning. So in this verse we only have two characters introduced. We have Jonah, son of Amittai, and we have the Lord, who is speaking to Jonah. And that's two things we begin with, and that sets the stage for everything that is to come. And these two figures are the most important figures throughout the whole of the book. The whole of the book is very much about this discourse, or this line of communication between these two individuals, or these individual characters, as it were. That marks the end of verse 1. We'll continue with our reading of this, doing, like I say, about 1 or 2 verses each week. This is the only verse for the present unit, but we'll pick up on it again in the next unit.